Good afternoon. It's great to have a compliant crowd. I didn't even have to shush you. My name is Al Horvath. I'm Undersecretary for Finance and Administration, and I'd like to welcome you to the maiden voyage of our Great Leaders Series. And what we are kicking off today is a program where 3 or 4 times a year we're going to invite to the Smithsonian great leaders from a variety of different fields, industries, and endeavors to come and talk to us about their thoughts on leadership as part of our own professional development and to make us even better leaders in the roles that we play here. And I can't imagine having a better kickoff than the event that we have today. We are setting the bar very, very high, and it's going to be very difficult to hit this bar again. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Eva Pell, Undersecretary for Science, who will introduce this afternoon's speaker. Eva?
Thank you, Al, and welcome to everyone. I just said to our speaker, we don't fill this auditorium very often, so it's high praise. Okay, so you know, I was once a college professor, so you always start with a question. How many of you have flown Southwest Air? All right, Herb. There you go. They all raised their hand. Okay, so then I'm telling you what you already know. It's somewhat a chaotic airline where you don't get an assigned seat, you queue up and you pick up your seat. It's less organized. It sounds less organized, though I think we'd all agree than it actually is. I remember the first time I went and I thought, oh, this is really going to be interesting. You know how you go for most airlines, you have your seat, you get there early, you look around, you wait to hear when your set of seats is announced, and you try to rush to the front, and it's actually quite chaotic. And surprisingly, the Southwest strategy is rather civilized. Everyone comes, they know what the rules are. Whenever you get there, you get online, and if you get there a little later, you just get a little later on the line. So it turns out that what starts as a chaotic design turns out to be more respectful, actually, than a lot of the traditional strategies. I think that strategy reflects today's speaker. The first time you meet Herb, words like chaotic definitely come to mind. But if you look at what Herb has accomplished, there's no chaos about it at all. Herb was an undergraduate at Wesleyan College. He majored in English and he minored in philosophy. And I think you'll see through the course of his discussion that it actually all adds up. While he was still in school, he spent 6 summers working at Campbell's Soup, where he served as a soup chef, a warehouse foreman, and a part-time financial analyst. Herb, I was only surprised to see that you hadn't been a waiter. After college, Herb went to NYU and he received his JD. Love took Herb to Texas, where he married a native of the Lone Star State, and he became a partner in a law firm there. Along the way, he met Roland King, and together on the back of a cocktail napkin, they sketched out a new airline. In 1967, they founded Air Southwest Company, which in 1971 became Southwest Airlines. Today, Southwest operates more than 3,400 flights a day, coast to coast, making it the largest U.S. carrier based on domestic passengers. Year-end results for 2010 marked Southwest's 38th consecutive year of profitability, something I don't think the other airlines can boast. Herb served as president and CEO from September 1981 until June 2001, and as executive chairman from March 1978 to May 2008. You think about that longevity and it speaks for itself. Herb is well known for his unique, laid-back personality and management style, for encouraging employees to take their jobs seriously, but not to take themselves too seriously. He's known for his keen sense of humor. He reportedly dressed up as Elvis on numerous occasions, and I once heard him tell a story about jumping out of a luggage compartment. I'm just having trouble figuring out how you got into that luggage compartment. This management style is also reflected in visible ways throughout the company. A notable example is that flight attendants have been known to sing flight announcements to the tunes of popular songs before and during flight. Everyone on the NASM board could tell you stories about Herb, and I have noticed that we never have a board meeting without a zinger coming from Herb's direction, but it isn't all fun and games. Amidst the joking are always serious thoughts and valuable contributions. I cannot think of a better person to talk with us today about how to be successful and to be civilized, and yes, have some fun along the way. Herb, we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to tell you that if my mother were in the audience today and heard your introduction, she would have said, "I wonder who's speaking." Because actually, I've received more lectures than I've given over the course of my life. And as far as leadership is concerned, I've got to tell you what a fabulous leader I am. It may sound a little egocentric, but I think this story will comprehend what I'm talking about. I was sitting in my office, and Belinda McCoy-Russ, who was then working for the executive office, came in and said, "Herb, put on your coat." So I hopped over in my closet, put my coat on. She got involved in an extraneous conversation with someone else. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, I said, "Belinda, would you mind telling me whether I'm cold or am I going someplace?" That's the kind of leadership I provide. But I'm not just honored. I'm really extremely proud, and I mean that sincerely, to be with you and to have served the National Air and Space Museum as a director under the leadership of Jack Dailey, who is one of the best leaders that I have ever seen in any aspect of public or private life. And I'm really impressed that you have created and you have maintained the finest, most extensive, and most meaningful institution of its kind in the world. As a consequence, today, I feel kind of like maybe a little flea on the neck of a Great Dane. The flea is sort of insignificant in and of himself, but very proud of the company he keeps. That's you. Also, in talking a bit about Southwest Airlines, I don't mean to imply that what transpires in the private sector can automatically be imported and incorporated into the public sector. You know your business. You know not only your business, but you have done it well. So you will have to be the judge of anything, of what I might say that is relevant and useful from the Southwest example. As a preface, I'm going to talk to you a little bit, tell you a little bit about Southwest Airlines. And this is not by way of braggadocio, although Dizzy Dean said, you know, it ain't bragging if you've done it. But I just don't want you to think that, you know, that I'm a old guy who's lost his marbles, or gone Looney Tunes, or I'm off my meds. When I talk about our humanistic approach to business, and tell you that it can really pay handsome dividends if you're looking for results, even in a benighted industry like air passenger service. And what do I mean by benighted? Well, Professor Jeremy Siegel from the Wharton School said, in the 32 years I've studied businesses, structurally, the airline industry is the worst business to be in. Warren Buffett made the statement that if somebody had shot down the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk in 1903, it would have been a tremendous favor to capitalism in the United States. When Warren was queried about his investment in U.S. Airways, he said, "I plead temporary insanity." And it is an industry that has a net loss since its inception. So it's against this backdrop that Southwest has had a pretty good record. It took 4 years of litigation to get us into business The incumbent airlines were not particularly welcoming or hospitable. And we started out with 3 airplanes and 18 flights per day. And as Secretary Pell mentioned, today we operate 690 airplanes, providing about 3,400 flights per day. At our inception, we were the smallest jet carrier in the United States. Today, from the standpoint of the number of originating passengers, as the Secretary said, we are the largest carrier in the United States. Moreover, Southwest has been profitable for 40 consecutive years, has provided total job security for its people in a very hazardous industry for 41 consecutive years, and in what Money Magazine described as a Ripley, believe it or not, feat of all the companies included in the S&P 500 during the 30-year period 1972 to 2002, Southwest produced the highest return to investors, 26% per year, compounded annually. A $100,000 investment in 1972 was worth $100 million in 2002. Parenthetically and unhappily, I have to tell you, I didn't have $100,000 in 1972. To establish this contrarian industry record, Southwest departed from traditional airline and traditional corporate doctrine. It became known as a business apostate and was commonly referred to as a maverick. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about our culture, which produced all of this and made it possible, because I believe that culture is the fundament of success in every type of organization. In addition to a simply easily understandable strategy encompassing only 11 words, that was so even an Irishman like me could understand it, and a modus operandi that was made radically different from most other carriers. It was funny, we had cash register ticketing. It punched out something that looked like a bus ticket, and Jim Jackson, who was a motivational speaker, liked to talk about us doing things differently. His conclusion was, do them differently and you'll be fine, you'll be prosperous. But he talks about, I guess it was an actuary perhaps, who gets his little cash register ticket and he's walking down the concourse, and he looks at it and he comes back to the ticket counter and says, ma'am, this ticket doesn't say where I'm going. And she looked at him and said, sir, don't you know where you're going? And then people were telling us that our little cash register tickets were eaten by their dogs and washed up, destroyed in the washing machine, and somebody was trying to sell us a multi-million-dollar ticketing system way back then, when our smartest guy, who almost graduated from high school in Texas, this is Texas I'm talking about, said, Herb, instead of getting that new system, why don't we just print across the top of it, this is a ticket. Okay. So basically, we hew to the credo that there is no such thing as conventional wisdom. If it's conventional, it's not wisdom. And if it's wisdom, it's hardly conventional. And we really focused on people from the very beginning, not things. I forget whether it was Calvin Coolidge or Bianca Jagger. You know, they're both thin. That's why I mix them up occasionally in my mind. One of them said that the business of business is business, and we said that's baloney. The primary business of any business is people, yesterday, today, and forever. And as among employees, shareholders, and customers, we were rather radical, because you'd go to the business schools back in the 70s, and this was supposed to be a conundrum. Who comes first? Your employees, your customers, or your shareholders? And my answer was very simple. Your employees come first. If they're treated well, they treat the customers well, the customers come back. The shareholders like that, coming back. But at that time, it was rather startling to have anybody enunciate that philosophy with respect to how to conduct a business. And the synergy is very simple, really. If you honor, And if you respect and if you care for and protect and reward your employees, regardless of title or position, which is very important, in turn, they will treat each other in a civil manner, in a warm, caring, and hospitable way, and you'll enjoy the environment better. And lest some think this internal and external customer service focus does not pertain to a particular line of business or endeavor, every organization that I'm aware of is in the customer service business in one way or another. I learned this in an anecdotal way about 50 years ago when a friend of mine told his somewhat elderly mother that she was paying $2,000 extra each year for a new car from a certain dealership. She said, "I know that, dummy, but when I have a problem, the dealership owner himself comes by to make it right." In other words, her $2,000 extra wasn't paid for the car, it was paid for the care. And that was a great lesson to me. And as a friend, not a consultant, nobody will pay me to consult. I'd love to do it, but don't get any offers. But I've been asked to talk to technology companies. One of them that's very prominent said about a year ago that his biggest problem was that his employees were not involved in the company, and they were going to have to find some way to do that. When Thad Allen was a commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Thad Allen said our biggest problem is keeping people involved in the service that we provide. And governmental agencies and departments, I was a hero, a patriot, in a sense, because when the Department of Homeland Security was created by jamming 22 governmental agencies together simultaneously overnight, I was asked to head the Cultural Improvement Task Force, and I did. And that was an incredible task when you just take 22 agencies and put them together the way that happened. But as I say, I think no matter where you are or what you do, you're in the customer service business, internally and externally. I had a funny one happen, by the way. A businessman came to me and he said, Southwest Airlines is much larger than my family company, which really is a family business. And he said, your people act a lot more like family than mine do. And so I went down to talk to him, and he was on the 6th or 7th floor in this building. He met me in the lobby and took me up. And, an elevator's pretty close quarters, and it would stop, and people would get on, and he never even acknowledged their physical presence, much less said hello to them. So we got to his office. I said, I think I've got a starter for you. Hi. And we believe that Southwest, that our job was not only to provide a far more reliable service at a far lower fare, but also to provide, I guess you might say, a spiritual infusion of fun, of warmth, of hospitality, and of diligent servanthood, which is the key for both our employees and our passengers. The intangibles of the spirit, in our estimation, are ultimately far more important than the tangibles of things. Why? First of all, it's a matter of morality and ethics. Secondly, as I said earlier, from a purely business standpoint, the tangibles can be purchased. Every airline can get airplanes from the Boeing company if they've got the wherewithal to pay for them. But the intangibles are far more difficult for competitors in any field to imitate. And unless a company is paying peonage compensation, psychic satisfaction is what many employees and even external customers are primarily seeking. And it's astounding because we will have people come to Southwest Airlines and apply for a job who take a 30% cut in their salary because they want to be in our type of environment rather than the ones that they have been in, which in many cases, from talking to them, I think they they think is the equivalent of serving under Mussolini during World War II. And if anyone doubts the value of esprit de corps, I suggest to talk with the United States Marine Corps. A book compared the spirit of Southwest Airlines to the spirit of the Marine Corps, and I was very proud of that. And esprit gets things done. Not only gets them done fast, and it gets them done well. The successful application of this humanistic philosophy to any organization demands that culture be ranked at the very top of leadership responsibilities. And the reason for that is that successful internal and external customer service, servanthood, actually demands involvement in the affairs of all departments, all divisions, all sectors, and all workplaces in an organization. You can't have it one place and not have it in another place. And that tells people that you really don't care all that much. Perhaps you're being hypocritical. Maybe you're lying to them. So you have to constantly apply yourself to determining that every place has the kind of culture that you want. So you have to give your cultural guru, I guess you might call it, tremendous organizational authority to have the kind of culture that you want metastasizing throughout an entire organization. In the case of Southwest Airlines, that was our president, Colleen Barrett. Now, turning to a few, perhaps somewhat, I don't know, iconoclastic thoughts with respect to creating a people-empowered, an energetic, and a fun-loving business environment. And by the way, I frequently hear the phrase in American business and business schools, you can't manage what you can't measure. And I think that's true. You know, in order to manage something, you have to measure it. But I'm talking about something that is not metrical in nature. It's not mechanistic. It's an added dimension, and that is leadership. Joe Stilwell, Vinegar Joe, during World War II, Jack heard me talk about this. As you can tell from his nickname, Vinegar Joe, he probably didn't have the most pleasant personality in the world, but when his troops had to retreat from Burma through the jungles and over the mountains to India, he declined to be flown out, and he marched with them through the jungles and over the mountains as they sustained 10,000 casualties. And to me, that's the kind of leadership you're looking for. It didn't produce any more supplies. It didn't produce any more armaments. Didn't produce anything except his faith in his men and that he was willing to accompany them and to die for them. That's the kind of intangible leadership that inspires people to go above and beyond. And one of the things we did, by the way, is visibly display our humanistic philosophy and our focus on people all over our organization. You can't go to any place at Southwest Airlines where it doesn't proclaim exactly how we want to treat our people. And you know, if it's public, you kind of have to dedicate yourself to it. Secondly, we oriented our mission statement in terms of how we wanted to treat our internal and external customers. And it was really funny that, you know, that makes it really both meaningful and eternal if it's phrased in terms of how you want to treat people. And some of these people would come in and they'd say, well, initially they'd say, "I want to sit down and help you design your mission statement." And I said, well, hell, if we can't design our own mission statement, we probably ought to shut our doors. You know, we don't need some third-party outsider to tell us what our mission is, I hope. And then, of course, they came along later and they said, you know, it's old. We want to refresh it. And I told them, I said, that's like refreshing Deuteronomy or Ecclesiastes, you know, because it's all about people. It never needs to be refreshed. And we always describe very carefully what we're looking for in new hires. And, you need to frequently refresh your recruiters and interviewers as to those criteria, because they can fall into that trap, the routine trap, the rut trap of saying, oh, we've got a slot, we've got to fill it right away, and that's our job, just to get somebody in, as long as, you know, their breath shows on a mirror. And we never felt that way. They came to me, and our people department, as we call it, and said, Herb, we're very embarrassed. We've interviewed 34 people for a ramp agent position in Amarillo, Texas, and you know, that's costly. Takes a lot of time. And I said, if you have to interview 134 to get the right person, do it. And fundamentally, we're looking for new hires with a warrior spirit, a servant's heart, and a fun-loving attitude. And we do hire for attitude. I'm not saying we disregard education. I'm not saying we disregard experience. I'm not saying we disregard expertise. But if it's a close call, we'll take the person with a great, positive, cooperative attitude and a teamwork focus over a competitor to work with us. And one of the things you soon learn, excuse me, is what I mentioned earlier, that no matter where they are, bad attitudes just spread throughout your organization. And by the way, we also use model employees in the hiring process. Who knows better whom to hire? We have our best pilots interviewing pilots, our best mechanics interviewing mechanics, our best flight attendants participate in interviewing flight attendants, and so on. And we give our, this was a fight. This was a real fight, particularly with maintenance and with flight ops. But we accomplished it. We gave our people department veto power over all new hires in every department. They couldn't tell you who to hire, but they could tell you, based on a bad attitude, who you couldn't hire. And as an acquaintance of mine puts it rather succinctly on the walls of his own company, no jerks need apply. And the word jerks is a euphemism in this case. When they did a video on his company, of course, they were walking through the company. Every one of those signs, which, as I say, did not use the word jerks, they had to blur it out. And you know, it's kind of funny, but, and I don't know how much of this you face, but we frequently hire people in substantial numbers. As airplanes come in, obviously you need more mechanics, you need more flight attendants, you need more pilots, not to mention others. And what we do is we interview them in groups. And most of them, we ask them to make a presentation. You know, what's the worst fix you've ever been in that you used humor to extricate yourself from? And by the way, when people are applying for a job, you hear some of the darndest stories that you've ever heard. But they don't realize we're not looking at them. We're looking at the people around them as they talk. We want to see if they're supporting them, if they're for them, if they're interested in them. And so we're really appraising not the presenter, but the people that are there listening to the presenter. And we bring in, we have our top officers talk to all the new hire classes to show them how important they are. And we also intensively and personally review new hire attitude and performance during any probationary period. And we brought in new hires, and this is what we asked them. We asked them, okay, you've been here 6 months. You know, you had a vision of what Southwest Airlines was when you joined us. Have we lived up to it? And it's kind of funny. I think the best answer I ever got was a new hire who said, Herb, I'll tell you, I've got a hell of a problem. I said, what's that? He said, well, every time something goes wrong, there's 5 or 6 people trying to help me. And he said, they really tangle things up and get in my way. And I said, I think I can live with that problem. But we think the recurring themes of all training should be leadership. Everyone's a leader by example, even though you may not think of them that way. The way the ramp agent puts a bag in the belly bin of the airplane is an example to all other ramp agents as to how to do it. And we think the customer service should be a recurrent theme, and that includes internal customer service, because, you know, everyone, including the finance and legal departments, has customers, internal or external. And we think of the general office as basically only the supply corps for the troops in the field, that it's a servant, not a master. And we provide guidelines only, not rules. The golden rule is the fundamental guideline, and if that's your fundamental guideline, then you've achieved civility, because after all, what does that mean? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Serve others as you would have them serve you. So if each one of you in each day and your confreres will observe the golden rule, civility will have been achieved. And we give our employees the flexibility to make decisions on the spot, as long as they're leaning toward the customer or trying to help out some other employee of Southwest Airlines. And I got a letter that amused me greatly from a customer service agent in Baltimore. Weather had put the plane down. It couldn't go on to Islip, Long Island. And she was on probation. She was in her first 6 months. And she wrote me, she said, "Herb, I hope you mean what you have said about giving us the flexibility to make decisions on the spot," because she hired 5 buses to transport the passengers on the ground from Baltimore to Islip. And of course, what we did was we rewarded her with a special award from Southwest Airlines. And one of the other things I think is helpful is to check every proposed improvement with the field first. We dream up things at the general office, and we pat ourselves on the back, and we think this is ingenious, what we've come up with. Then we bring in the customer service agents who actually, handle the ticket count. They shoot about 18 holes in it in 10 minutes. And you find the same thing with any other operation, whether it be maintenance or flight operations. And so we think it's always better to consult the people in the field before you put in a new program. And one of the things that I found out personally is that who knows better than the receptionist what new telephone system you ought to have? Or who knows better than a customer service agent what kind of point of sale technology you should be employing? And we also tell employees to be themselves. And what we mean by that is when they come to work, they can act naturally, to have fun, that you don't need to, in effect, wear a mask or look like a brick at work. Basically, we tell them we hired you because you're you, not because you're a robot or an automaton. And Robert Frost once made a comment. He said, isn't it a shame that people's minds work furiously until they get to work, and then they stop? And we're trying to keep their minds working throughout the day because they're enjoying their associations and their environment. And communication, of course, communicate, but not in deadly corporate speak or bureaucraties, which really, turns people off, confuses them, or maybe makes them skeptical that you really know what you're talking about. To give you an example only, one of our pilots said to me one day, he said, "Herb, what is this price elasticity?" And this is what I told him as an example. I said, would you buy more meat if it cost $1 a pound instead of $3 a pound? He said, well, of course I would. I said, price elasticity, that's all it is. What's the price of meat? People buy less when the price is high, they buy more when the price is low. And that kind of example from everyday life is much more informative to many people than perhaps a theory might be. And we set up employee services and employee care departments as we got larger to cope with the aspect of size. And, excuse me, and really, they're the departments that are constantly in contact with their employees. Whether they have professional or personal problems, then of course the two are linked. It's hard to have personal problems without having professional problems, and vice versa. And we show that we value our people as individuals, not just as workers, that we value them outside the workplace as well as inside the workplace. Through word and by deed, we join in their every personal exaltation, such as the birth of a baby, and their every personal mishap and grief, such as the death of a relative, as an example. They always hear from us when they have something significant happening in their personal lives. And we also, as we got bigger, we found that it was much more difficult to keep the fire of culture burning. And so we created a culture committee, and that is its job. They're volunteers to keep the culture alive in the many different places where Southwest Airlines operates. And they just do wonderful things on their own. One lady who's on the culture committee, just as an example, to pull it down to the empirical, she was going to Europe on a 2-week vacation, and we were closing one station in Detroit to move everybody to another station in Detroit. She gave up her vacation. The 2 stations weren't getting along and spent the 2 weeks in Detroit instead of Europe, reconciling the differences amongst the people of those stations. And we always celebrate and honor visibly employees who display golden rule behavior, and it doesn't matter whether it's in the workplace or outside the workplace. We have a wall that's dedicated to our heroines and heroes who do splendid things in their communities, for instance. And we honor those because that's the type of role model that we want for all of our people, that altruism, that selflessness. And we also have one that you'll love, I think. We have a dog wall. And we told all our employees if they didn't have a picture of their pet that they would like to have hung in the general office. We had hired a pet photographer, and they could come in and have pictures taken. Well, I could see German Shepherds eating gerbils all day long, you know. But we did have a little embarrassing incident, and that is that the flight attendant applicant was sitting in the atrium waiting to be interviewed, and my dog came over and peed on her leg. And I told her, I said, that's one of the tests at Southwest Airlines, to see whether you have a sense of humor. If you smile, you're hired. But what you're basically trying to create, in my humble opinion, is a company where people smile because they want to, not because they think that they have to. A company bound by love, a company where the people are trying to protect each other like a band of brothers. Ultimately, they concluded that's what they were fighting for, to protect and take care of each other, is much stronger than one bound by fear. And for those who remain skeptical of what I've been saying, despite our record, I want to tell you just one thing in closing, kind of, you know, the American public's favorite word, in closing, or finally, you know, the one everybody adores. But Southwest, for many, many years, has not only been the leader in customer satisfaction since DOT started keeping those statistics in 1987, fewest complaints per 100,000 passengers carried is their measure, but also has been one of the 10 most admired companies in the world in Fortune's annual issue on that subject, which, if you just think about it a second, is pretty remarkable because we don't serve the world. We just serve the United States. People in France, Germany, Argentina, Japan are voting for us as the most admired company, even though they never see us, but they've heard about us. And finally, I want some applause, please. Could I hear a little something from you? And in closing, I know how to be popular. I remember the little girl's essay about Socrates. She wrote, Socrates was a philosopher. He talked a lot. They poisoned him. Since wild turkey, not hemlock, is my favorite beverage, I will shut up. Thank you for having me. Wonderful to be with you. How we doing on time, Al?
Great.
Oh, good.
So if you take a seat.
I'll take a seat.
Okay, we're going to have time for a few questions, but this time I'm actually going to read my notes so that I don't forget anything. First off, Chandra Heilman and Tim Holloman are bearing microphones, and so if you have a question, raise your hand, and they'll bring the microphone to you. And then secondly, just so that you know I'm not crazy, I will repeat the question, not because I want to make sure I get it right, but we're taping this, and we want to make sure that the question is audible on the video that we'll make available to others on PRISM in the future. So with that in mind, questions?
Thanks for your wonderful talk. I really appreciate your discussion on leadership. I think one of the important attributes of a leader is when to let go, and especially like for a founder of an airline.
I'm sorry, would you hold that a little closer?
Yeah. One of the attributes of a strong leadership is know when to let go.
Yes.
And when you hired Gary Kelleher as your CEO, when did you realize that that was the man to take your place?
Let me repeat that.
Yeah.
One of the great attributes of leadership is knowing when to let go, and when did you know that it was time to let go and hand the reins over to Gary Kelleher?
Thanks, Al. First of all, I'd like to say by way of a preface that a title and position should never be about power, because if you ever have to relinquish power, and that's your focus, you're going to be very, very unhappy. On the other hand, if you think of it as responsibility, you have an entirely different result. You say, "Ooh, it's going to be kind of relief to put this down and to have somebody else undertake it." And Gary Kelleher had been there for quite a while before he became our CEO. I think something like 18 years. So I was thoroughly familiar with him, had worked with him for a long, long time, and he seemed like an ideal replacement for me. And that has proven to be the case. Now, one of the things you've got to do, and which I have done, Al, is as a founder of the company and longtime CEO and executive chairman, you have to immediately take a much lower profile within the company. And I stopped going to company events because I didn't want anybody to think I was competing with Gary for attention. Besides, he's younger and better looking than I am, so I would have lost out anyhow. And if I ever have a suggestion to make to Gary, I write it out in longhand, and there are very few, by the way. I'll write it out in longhand, just send it to him so nobody else sees it. But that's one of the issues that frequently comes up, when to lay it down. And some people, as you implied, just try to hang on forever. And there's one 100-year-old man, 105 now, I think, and he's excuse me, he's been called back 5 times to be the CEO of his company. Yeah, and I guess, maybe longevity is one of their goals. But you should be ready to lay it down at a reasonable time, and you should be able to rejoice in picking a successor, and you should be able to rejoice in the success of that successor, because ultimately, if you're a CEO, what's the most important thing that you leave as a legacy for your company? The person that succeeds you. And I'm very pleased that it was Gary Kelleher.
Thank you. Another question. Got one back there.
Good afternoon. First of all, I have to say that I frequently try to change my flights around, so I end up being able to take Southwest, so I'm a big fan. And,
I'll buy some more whiskey tonight.
All right. The other thing, with any company, any workplace, there are things that go wrong. Sometimes people are not getting along, it's not a good fit. How do you deal with things like conflict resolution within the company?
So the question is,
Excuse me, Al.
how do you deal with conflict resolution within the culture that you've created?
I'll tell you how we try to deal with conflict resolution. Instead of passing rules, if there's been something in the reservation center You know, suppose someone has dressed a little too fetchingly, as an example only. We don't pass a whole bunch of rules. We just call the agent in and talk to the agent about what we're looking for, because to our mind, or my mind at least, the more rules you have, the less you're really managing. Because you can say to people, gee, I'd love to do this for you, Al, but look, here on page 53, I just can't. And so we try to resolve it on a very personal basis. And to answer your question specifically, let's assume that two people in a common workplace, let's say accounting, just as an example, are not getting along with each other. You know what we do? We bring them both in. We sit each of them on one side, the other on the other side of a table, and we sit there until they thrash it out between each other. And it's mostly successful. And in some cases, when it doesn't seem to be succeeding the way that we would like to have it succeed in terms of, you know, a rapprochement, an understanding, we say, I'll tell you what, take a week off with pay. And while you're doing your time off, think about whether you really want this job or not. And then come back and tell us whether you do. And if you do, you're going to have to change your attitude toward your fellow employees. And if you don't, you know, you can go work someplace else. But we try to do it on an individual basis. And one of the problems you run into rather consistently is that people in different operational departments, which I'm sure you see, Al, they don't understand what the duties are of people in the other departments. So they get into conflicts. Well, let's say that a flight attendant focused on customer service wants to hold the airplane for some reason for a passenger who's straggling. The ops agent wants to close that door and get the airplane off the ground. And so they tangle with each other. And the reason they tangle with each other, and I've been through this any number of times, is that basically neither of them understand what the other's job is. The ops agent's basic job is on-time performance. The flight attendant's basic job is customer service. And so we get a whole group of leaders from each department together, and they sit down and discuss, you know, what they do. Now, we had a program called Go, See, and Do that was designed to accomplish this cross-fertilization, at least, you know, cerebral cross-fertilization. In this case, it was Go, See, and Do. And you know, pilots are always curious about things. They always like to kind of look into stuff and experiment with it. And so one of our pilots went into technology. And there on the wall is this big glassine cover, which says, with a button under it, which says, do not touch except in case of emergency. Well, being a pilot, of course, he has to open it up, you know, and punch it, which shut down our headquarters computer system. So I changed the name of the program to Go and See and eliminated the Do. But we just took people all over you know, the mechanics went to marketing, and the marketing people went to the reservation centers, and the reservations people worked in the stations. And we have well, I don't know whether we do anymore, but I established a day in the field for our officers. Every officer had to go out once a quarter and work a job on the line. They had to load bags on the ramp. They had to take reservation calls in the reservation center. They had to work at the ticket counter. And believe me, they got a lot of familiarity, you know, with how things really are in the real world. And big bonuses come out of that. At that time, our chief financial officer went over to work the ticket counter on a bad weather day at Love Field. Among other things, he took a bus ticket for transportation by air from Dallas to Houston. And also, he noticed all of the rigmarole that our agents had to go through with connecting passengers, you know, the stamping and the stapling and all that kind of stuff. And he said, we've got to have a new point-of-sale system for our customer service agents, which was correct, and we did. Now, the way he tested it was, he called me down to technology, And he says, Herb, I want to see whether you can handle this new quick res system. So I fumbled around a little bit. I was finally able to accomplish it. And he looked at me and said, Herb, that's real good, because we figured if you could do it, anybody could. I got a little egotistical and big-headed after that.
Question?
If you were young again, and you, if you were young again, yeah.
You want to step outside, Buster? You know what? If somebody helped me down off this platform, you want a piece of me?
No, if you were young again, and really,
It sounds like a tape.
Wow.
and you had the knowledge that you have now, what would you do differently?
I'm not sure I'm repeating that question. Well, would you do anything differently?
No, Al, I wouldn't. And I hate to say this in front of this audience, but the reason that I would not is that I'm infallible. I normally get about, I don't know, a couple of calls a week from the Pope. What can I say? I mean, I have to tell the truth.
Question? There's one way back in the back.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your remarks. They're outstanding. I would like to just very quickly give a pitch to one of your employees. I've known several years a young lady by the name of Karen Price Ward, who has worked out of Maryland.
What's her name?
Karen Price Ward.
Oh, I know her well.
Yes, indeed. Very fine young lady.
She's splendid.
And I commend you for your work in the community. Karen has supported several of the initiatives that I worked on before, and Southwest was always an outstanding partner. My question is, as there was only one CEO position when you decided to step down, how do you retain quality staff when there's only a limited number of positions that can be filled?
How do you retain
Excuse me, Al.
good quality
That's
staff
an excellent question.
when there are only limited numbers of positions to fill?
Well, in my case, retaining quality staff, when one person was elevated to succeed me as CEO was pretty easy. Because frankly, after 40 years, I didn't realize that I'd been holding up the promotions of about 35 different people. So when I left and Gary moved up, then somebody took Gary's place. Then somebody took the place of the person who took Gary's place. Then somebody took the place of the person that took Gary's place. And all of a sudden, everybody was real happy because they were really glad, that I was stepping down, because they were all getting promoted as a consequence of it. But in actuality, we always try to ensure that our officers are a very collegial group that work very well and very closely together. So you don't have that traditional kind of, in some businesses, animosity and turf guardianship and all that sort of stuff. And I hired a guy that at Southwest, because I didn't really want to be part of corporate life for quite a while. I thought it might be somewhat confining, but he hired some people at Southwest Airlines, and when he was the CEO, I helped to start the airline, but I didn't want to work there full time until I fell in love with our people. That's what really brought me to Southwest. And first thing I did was run around to the folks he'd hired and say, hey, wait a second, don't be scared. You've got a job, it's secure. Just because somebody else hired you, I'm not going to fire you. And that kind of approach, I think, is kind of helpful in not making people constantly apprehensive, concerned, and worried about whether they're going to be taken care of or not. And so we didn't have any, you know, topsy-turvy sort of thing. People leaving, you know, as a result of Gary succeeding me. Everybody just went about their business with their new promotions and said, gee, thank you, Herb. We think that's the best thing you've ever done.
We have time for one more question, right there in the middle.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Madame.
Recently, the NFL made several major hirings and there were no diversity among their hirings. What's your philosophy on hiring diversity within your management level?
Well, I'll tell you what our philosophy is. It's very simple. I, years ago, got involved in, well, I didn't get involved with them, but I was invited to a meeting with a number of concerns that were talking about enhancing their diversity. And they had a very peculiar formula for doing that. And I finally told them, I said, let me tell you how you enhance diversity. I said, you hire minorities to recruit. That's how you enhance diversity. That's where you start. And secondly, you know, a lot of these consultants go around and they say, well, gee, if you hire African Americans or you hire Hispanics, or nobody ever says that about the Irish, by the way. I'm very disappointed. Mostly I think they're thinking if you hire the Irish, you'll crater your business. But anyhow, you know, they say, well, it'll help you make more money. And I say consistently to each one of them, it's not a question of making money. It's a question of morality. It's a question of ethics. You just do what's right. And so Southwest Airlines has always been very diverse. As a matter of fact, I guess it was now that presented me with an award back in the late 80s or early 90s for having done the most in the southwest part of the country to further pay equality for women. And so we've got, most of our managers are women. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you something, Al, I got to tell you this. I'm kind of focusing on this from the female standpoint. We're the only airline that's been sued twice for discriminating against males in hiring. And we lost both lawsuits. Yeah. Well, in one, I couldn't try it because I had to testify. It's a violation of the canons of ethics if you know you're going to testify in advance of the trial. So I knew I was going to testify, and I got to tell you, it was kind of funny because we defined Southwest Airlines as a woman, you know, pert, witty, with it, modern woman. And so we're contending in court that being a female is a bona fide occupational qualification as far as Southwest Airlines is concerned. So the lawyer on the other side, the plaintiff's lawyer, he gets me on cross-examination. And he says, Mr. Kelleher, he said, wouldn't you admit this was just a small part of your marketing and of the overall success of your airline? And thinking I'm a real clever witness, I said, well, Mr. Mulberg, let me tell you something. My liver is a small part of my body. But if you excise it, what happens? The whole body dies. Whereupon the presiding judge, whom I knew pretty well, leans over and says, Mr. Kelleher, I think most witnesses would have mentioned their hearts instead of their livers. At which point he said, strike that from the record.
Well, Herb, I can't thank you enough on behalf of everyone here and on behalf of the Smithsonian Institution. You have made a contribution that will make us even greater into the future. Thank you very, very much.
Well, I've got, Al, thank you. Thank you. I have one final question of Al, if I might. Is
Sure.
a check in the mail?
Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, we gift wrapped it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Al. Great to be with you. Pleasure to make it.